And we're already online. Great. Well, welcome everybody this afternoon to our, I think we're on our fourth talk of the day. So thank you for joining us. So I'm joined today by Lucy Adlington. We'll talk a bit more about how we've met and how we've ended up here today. So Lucy is stepping in for us today. We were originally going to be joined by Lucy Powery, who sadly can't make it. Lucy was booked to interview Lucy Powery and is now being interviewed by me.
So you figured that one Lucy is as good as another.
We'll just swap you in.
I'm not actually going to talk about Lucy Powery's books, but if anybody is listening, they're really lovely. She's wrote a lovely series of YA novels about a wonderful group of friends, very neurodivergent. I could talk about them for an hour, but today it's all about us.
It's about you, really.
Yes, we've just swapped Lucy's.
So what we'll do is we'll get Lucy Powery to come back for another event later in the year, and we can talk more about her books and her work then. So thank you for stepping in, and obviously you're the perfect person to step in because you're a YA novelist, a few novels to your name, and also non-fiction as well. So there's lots of things that we can talk about today. So give a brief introduction to Lucy. So Lucy Adlington is the author of 7 children's novels and 6 non-fiction books. So we'll be discussing her work and also sharing a very emotional journey, how her award-winning YA novel, Red Ribbon, led to the uncovering of a remarkable piece of history, as told in the New York Times bestseller, The Dressmakers of Auschwitz. Here we go. And when you were writing this, we were over in Israel together many years ago.
Yeah, we have to disclose that Angela has been my writing buddy for quite a long time, which is really lovely because writing can be very solitary. And I don't have one of those big gangs of loads of friends who want to read my books. In fact, they all avoid it. But yes, we did take a trip, a research trip together to stay at the beach at Tel Aviv, and it rained pretty much every day.
The entire time, yeah.
That's the writing life. It's so glamorous.
Yeah, we stayed in and wrote. It was fine. So yeah, we'll come back to that a bit when
we're going to come back to your birthday in Jerusalem.
Yeah, it was my 40th birthday. So this was back in 2020. So this is just before lockdown. So we were worried then about Israel and Gaza. So there was a lot of, again, here we are 4 years later. But at the time it was we weren't sure whether we'd be going or not right until the last minute. We went and had this amazing trip, came back and then lockdown.
COVID lockdowns.
But you carried on with the book and it's done very well indeed.
Yes, so very happy to talk about that transition from writing children's fiction to writing a very, very adult non-fiction.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably start a little bit at the beginning. And when did you start writing? So Webs of Childhood is obviously our theme for the exhibition in the Parsonage and also for the festival. So let's go back to childhood. We've got a nice picture of you.
Love this picture.
Here you are. So tell us about writing stories and what you read when you were younger.
You know, you look at a picture of yourself as a child, you think, is that how I looked? Because in my head, I did not look like that. And I don't just mean the pudding bowl haircut, but in my head, I was all the people in books. I was all the characters. I was all the stories. And I think that's a way that children's books can be amazing, isn't it? That you can lose yourself in them. And I can't even remember what your question was. I'm still thinking about the orange and brown outfit from the 1970s.
Oh, it's fabulous, it's fabulous.
So coming to reading as a child.
Yeah, so what got you started reading as a child, first of all?
So my family had a lot of uprooting and not a lot of money. So it was a question of you could become very familiar with spaces in your childhood. And we would always have a bookshelf that moved with us wherever we went. And I spent a lot of time living with grandparents. And so basically, I just read whatever books there were. And that might be familiar to a lot of readers and writers. And so there were these extraordinary Victorian and Edwardian books about good children, bad children who get punished. It's just like Jane Eyre. Bad children who get punished, and then good children who die and go to heaven. So I read all those. And then there were extraordinary encyclopedias, and then there were the classics, and then there were, just a whole range. And then I discovered the library, and they let you live there pretty much. Yep. Yeah. And I read everything Enid Blyton. And I know that there are a lot of issues with her now, but I just love that. But the book that really was, I don't know if you had a book like this, Angela, but the book that really was the foundation for all my reading, not writing, was Lord of the Rings. Right. My mother read it to us from when I was 5. Right. You're looking at me like, what? Yeah, and so that idea of being used to listening to stories and the language going in, and she'd always meant to call me Sam after Samwise Gamgee. because I'm so quiet and loyal and Frodo, I can't carry you, Mr. Frodo. so that language stayed with me, even if I never aspired to write in it.
Yeah,
I just loved it.
Yeah.
Did you have a book like that?
Yeah, I think I liked all the Enid Blyton books.
Magic Faraway Tree.
Well, I've got my copy of The Faraway Tree from when I was little, and I've got a 3-year-old now. But I didn't want her to have it, which is awful because she'd ruin it. So I bought her own copy. And what's interesting is that it has been, so Fanny is now Franny, and there's been a few other.
Oh, they don't call her Dame Slap-a-Lot, they call her Snap-a-Lot. But she does
we've not
slap
got
kids.
to that yet. So
she's bad.
Yeah. So there's probably a few changes, but so she's got her own copy that she can do what she likes with.
And my first writing was riffing off Enid Blyton. So I started writing stories about children, who didn't look like that. They did not have that haircut. But then I think, like a lot of children, I wanted to write stories about children who were older or adults. I just saw myself in Tolkien, perhaps, or in the adult world.
Yeah. I think when you're little, I think when I read, you're picturing yourself as an adult for most of it, aren't you?
Yeah.
Sort of.
Even though you don't understand it and you don't know what being an adult means, and I've yet to discover. No, but you have all these particularly when you get to the age of yearning and pubescence, puberty. I never knew what I was yearning for, but you want to put yourselves into those older characters.
Yeah, and I think that's where access to your parents' books is useful, even if you don't quite get them. You want to read what
Flowers in the Attic.
Yeah,
I'm glad you read that one.
I think I accidentally read that quite young. So
I read loads. I actually kept a reading diary. I should have bought it from when I was about 14. And it's got Sweet Valley High, which are the American romances, but also Dostoevsky, a bit of Jane Eyre thrown in, and then Judge Dredd graphic novels, and it's just, I just think, wow, you really had no friends, Lucy. This is amazing.
And then, so when did this transition come to actually writing? When do you remember when that sort of kicked in?
Round about then.
Okay.
So as a child, I didn't have language for a while. I was born premature. I was a teeny baby and had to be in hospital a lot. And the doctors basically told my mother in very unflattering languages what I was going to be like, that I can't even use that. I'm not going to use the R word. And then I learnt to talk, and I don't think I've stopped since then. And then I learnt to read. I remember it. That was me. One day in a playground, having no friends. I'm laughing, but I think it was true. Just picking up a book and just knowing what the words said. I think it was Billy Goat's Gruff, the Ladybird books. They were great. And so as soon as I could write, /scrawl, I just wrote compulsively. And I think it was the one lesson at school that that was heaven to me, was being told write a story, and the other kids are like, how can I fill one page of an exercise book? And I'm like, can I have another book, please? So I loved it. Were you like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think just books and writing and pen in hand and probably all the same.
And crayons and drawing them. I wish I'd bought the books. I used to draw my own and illustrate them and then staple them together and pretend they were published. That's pretty much what this is, isn't it?
We're just grown-ups doing the same thing, aren't we? Really? And you said, you made a note that your first story is of the rabbit that hanged itself.
In my defence, J.K. Rowling, I don't know if she stole the idea, but no, J.K. Rowling did something, that was one of her first stories.
Oh, okay.
It was similar. I mean, we never met. I didn't know this woman, but and she's gone on a different trajectory. But it was called The Rabbit That Hanged Itself. I don't know why. I'm sorry, I know you have a rabbit.
No, it's fine. I don't think she'll hang herself.
No,
she's quite happy.
Just try it. I was veering towards it. Yes, and there were others.
Snorkel and the Honey Cake.
I loved writing comedy, and I guess I was influenced by Arthurian legends and the Honey Cake. What's not to like? And I have kept. I've probably got that somewhere. I've kept boxes and boxes and boxes of stories, and sometimes I go back and read them, and you expect to cringe a bit, and I'm actually thinking, this is really good. This is, and 3 days later, I've forgotten to pee or eat, and I'm still reading my own work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you've kept all of that. Have you kept some of the books from when you were young as well?
Yeah, I should have bought them. They were all illustrated. I used to write reviews for them.
Very keen, very keen. And do you read some of those books again now? Do you dip into anything from...
Sometimes, yeah, when I'm having a... Oh, do you mean children's books?
Yeah,
other authors. I nearly bought some of those as well. I've got a bookshelf at home that's just favourite children's books and teenage books. I don't know if you kept yours. And I nearly bought my very well broken Ursula Le Guin, the Wizard of Earthsea series, and it was always the second one I liked that features the woman. And I had the Enid Blyton ones, obviously, but there were so many books that we used to pick up secondhand. There was a little shop opposite the library that sold books for 10p. This is in the 1970s, and it was heaven. The idea that you could just pick anything. So there's one called The Swish of the Curtain, about a bunch of kids who set up a theatre company and put on shows, which is pretty much our lives now as well. So yeah, I've kept a lot of my childhood books.
Oh, fabulous. And then, so let's go to your first YA novel. Can you tell us a bit about it and how that came about?
Okay, so my first YA novel is a book called The Diary of Pelly D, and I didn't know what YA was. I had no idea that there were these genres that people read, because I skipped teen fiction and went straight onto adult science fiction and fantasy when I was a teen. So I wrote this book in, I hate to confess this, but it was 3 weeks. You know, when you get that idea and you just, because I didn't know any better. And essentially I was riffing on, I've always been, since I was a student, been really keen on history, and I looked into World War II history a lot, and the Holocaust, history of the Holocaust. And I was reading about the uncovering of diaries that had been buried during the war in Warsaw. And they were buried by Jewish people who were aware that their history was being erased, and they put them in, you know, carefully wrapped up and buried them, and they were uncovered after the war. The city's been rebuilt. And I thought, this is after having read The Diary of Anne Frank, which many of us come to, I thought, blimey, what if we hadn't won the war? What if the Allies hadn't won? What if the Nazis had found this archive? It would have been destroyed. So the idea was, what if someone from the Hitler Youth found Anne Frank's diary? We would never get to read it. And that stuck in my mind, but I didn't want to write a history. It seemed very presumptuous to write historical fiction, even though I later did. So I wrote it as science fiction. And the idea was that there's a boy, he's digging, he finds a diary, and he starts to read it, and then it's how the reading of the diary changes him. And it's the diary of a girl called Pelly. And I didn't even know what was going to happen. I don't know if you find this with a book. You start writing and you don't know. And I would write each entry and meet new people and watch the love story unfold and the tragedy unfold, and then it ended how it ends. And that was the first one I sent to my agent. And that was on maybe Friday, and I got a call on Monday saying, I want to represent you, which was amazing. So I probably just said, what? You never believe it, do you?
So you sent it to a few agents then, or just trying with one?
I'd sent out another manuscript, again, historical fiction set in York, where I'm from, and I just got, you know, all the range of rejection letters. I was telling you earlier, got one say, we don't see the slightest possibility of this work being published.
All right. Fair enough.
But you keep going, and many publications later.
And how did that go? Did that open up more doors, or was it kind of, did you then have to sort of start again with the next one, or did that lead to the next book?
The difficult second album. Inevitably it does. You get on a roll when you're published, and when the book is well received, which it was. It did very well in America. The way the story was told felt to be really fresh and interesting. But I think I was so maybe in my bubble. I had no understanding of how the world of publishing worked. I was just like, oh, I love writing, here's a book, would you like to read it? And so I wrote the second one, and it was very dark, very strange, and a lot of people say it's their favourite one of my books. And then I look back and read it and think, gosh, I was doing a lot of strange stuff then. But from there, I was able to, you know, I had a great editor who kept saying, what are you doing next? What are you doing next?
And so quite a few novels, so 7 now, isn't it?
I think. Probably, I keep losing track.
7.
Yeah, 7. I wrote 7 down because I keep getting interested in things.
Yeah.
And so I went through a phase of being really interested in ancient Egyptians, and I was a lot of my work involves doing workshops and presentations about history, using objects to tell stories. And so I just thought, oh, what would happen if? And that's always been my starter. What if? What if? And so I wrote an Egyptian one, and then I went back to World War II, and I was really into volcanoes. I was doing a lot of hiking of volcanoes. And I learned that Vesuvius in Italy, the eruption that destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum, two of my favourite places, it erupted in the middle of World War II, in middle of one of the most ferocious battles in World War II. And so I thought, well, I have to, what if you were a soldier fighting then? And then I wrote the book that I suppose helped break me out of, because I was what they call a mid-list author, which is fabulous, known, but we can't all be wonderfully famous. Yeah. And I wrote a book that really went back to my roots of what I was really interested in. Yeah.
And can we just do a slight segue about your other work? Because alongside writing 7 YA novels, obviously the costume historian.
I am a costume
obviously
historian.
Feeds into your research, your love of history. So tell us a bit about History Wardrobe, so we know your other side of work.
History Wardrobe is perhaps what I'm best known for, and it's coming up to 25 years now. And essentially, it's teaching women's history through clothes. And it's just the most amazing job. So I and my team, we collect vintage and antique garments. They all have stories, they all hold memories, and we do presentations about them. And this might be about the suffragettes, how clothes matter to them, or it might be on the 1980s. Yeah, that's pretty frightening. And I've been here at this as part of the writing festival here in Haworth, doing a talk called Gothic for Girls. So I love storytelling in all ways, but especially through the clothes.
Yeah, and that's come through obviously with the Red Ribbon and obviously dressmakers.
Are we going to come to those?
Yeah, so I feel just to sort of set the scene. So you've got that side of your work, you've got the YA novels, and then it seems to sort of all come together. Yeah. So tell us about the Red Ribbon.
So back in 2008, I was reading voraciously, still as ever. I think I had a few friends by then. I think I'd got some loyal friends together. Yeah. And I'd been reading a book about the Third Reich and the fashion trade, which is actually an incredibly interesting topic. And I came across mention of a fashion salon, which I thought, fashion salon, Third Reich. But the fashion salon was in Auschwitz, in the concentration camp. It was just outside the main camp. And so there were this reference to a fashion, and I thought, how can you have a fashion salon in a place that's in my mind, I just associated it with horror and genocide and suffering. And so I wanted to find out more about it, because there were these names mentioned, and you know what it's like, don't you? You're the same when you sort of get stuck into a topic, but I couldn't. And so that's when the imagination came in, and I told my agent, who was a brilliant agent, I said, Kate, I got this idea for a book, but I need to just go away and write it. I don't want to tell you. Almost like it's going to jinx. Do you ever get that? I don't want to jinx it. It's a very serious idea. The idea is that there is a 14-year-old girl called Ella, who's named after my grandmother, who's Ella Rose, starting her first day at work, and you don't know where she is, you don't know what's going on, but there's strangeness all around. And it was my way of using fiction to try and figure out what would it be like. I couldn't find out the truth. And I didn't know what would happen. And I met the characters along the way. But all the way through it, it's about dressmaking. It's about a girl who sews. And she literally has to sew to save her life. And I thought, I want a book that's just about a very female-coded skill, sewing. Not something heroic where you've got tanks and guns and daggers and all of those. And it was when you get a book like that that you just really hooked into. And I sent it to my agent. And she was, very complimentary. Yeah. Got a lovely publisher who
it's gorgeous book.
A gorgeous. Beautiful. This is the limited edition hard, and they wrapped it. It's got a wraparound cover that folds in like a gift, and the imagery is of a red ribbon, which is very much part of the story. It represents hope and love and friendship. And then these buttons, these actually come from my collection. I'm actually a stickler because they had the wrong buttons. They weren't 1940s buttons. I thought, no, you can't. And then all the way through the text, it's got beautiful illustrations. The ribbon flows through it. There are pins and needles and scissors. So they did me proud with this. They did well.
And was it always going to be a YA novel? I know you went with a 14-year-old protagonist. Did you ever think about doing it as anybody older, or was that the story that jumped to you, a young girl?
I think it was
that situation.
I think because I got into the groove, I was expected to write YA books, and
so
I didn't know how to do. I hadn't. I was doing loads of performance work and presentation work, and then I did this, and it really caught people's imagination, and I brought along some of the foreign editions.
Yeah, it's been around the world.
It's fascinating seeing all the different covers that people. This is the Dutch version, and then I just received this very poignantly from Ukraine, and it's the ink. The pages are gorgeous. The artwork. I would have loved to have read this as a child, as a young woman, but cannot read Cyrillic. So. It was very nice, mid-career to have the readers and the success that you perhaps dream of as a writer, and to know it was from a story that really meant a lot to me, and that I wrote with a lot of integrity. Yeah. But I was going to say, and then what happened? And then? Well, nothing. I wrote the sequel. I wrote a sequel called Summerland, which followed one of the characters, and I set it in Yorkshire. And I set it in a country house in Yorkshire and had a different recipe for each chapter because it was about food. And so that was a lovely, doing the book talks was great because I could give out the recipes and talk about the food. But what happened was, as the book became more popular around the world, it was reviewed in Israel. And then I started getting messages saying, well, you've written this story, it's completely imaginary. But my mother was one of the real dressmakers in Auschwitz. Or my aunt was one of the dressmakers. And then I got a message from Prague from someone saying, well, my grandmother ran the fashion salon in Auschwitz. And at this point that's pretty staggering to go from a children's book that is imagined with a lot of integrity and research, but it's purely imagined. I didn't know. And then you think, this is real. These are real people. And I know you research history so much, and you're involved in some really interesting explorations. When you first see somebody's handwriting, or a photograph of someone, and you think, wow. Yeah,
it brings it home, doesn't it? I think what we'd say back to the Brontes, it's the objects. We had a Parsonage Unwrapped evening with Emily's collection. And then, and you can read the novel, you can read about her, and then that's her hair that somebody's kept and passed on, and their handwriting. And I think for that one, it's something, to have created that and then to find out that it's, well, you knew that it was real, but to hear from people. And I think that's
and amazing, it's mixed feelings in some way, because I suddenly thought, God, this is a huge responsibility. And I've told this story, and in my story, I've got 4 girls. There's Ella and Rose, who are friends, very loving. There's Marta, I created, who ran the workshop, and a guard, one of the SS guards called Carla. And I wanted to see how all of these 4 teenagers survived the situation. Then I found out the actual head of the workshop was called Marta. I'm like, oh my God, but she's a bitch in my book. She's a survivor. And so I had to write to the relatives and say, I want you to know.
It was fiction.
this, and we changed the name in later editions. I didn't want to have that confusion. I still stand by this book because creatives, we need to respond to trauma, don't we? Whichever war it is, whichever traumatic incident, we need to find a way to express it, and that's what books can do. But having been in touch then through this fictional story the relatives of the dressmakers who'd survived sewing in this fashion salon, they were able to share photographs and testimonies and garments, which for me as a costume collector was, that was pretty staggering. And so then I crafted this beautiful book, and I say beautiful in a very bittersweet way. It is the most extraordinary piece of history I've ever come across, and I know there are many, and it was a real privilege to write it. And my agent said, well, could you write a novel? Because at that time, The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris, a novelisation of someone's life, was doing just globally extraordinarily well. And I said, I can't. It's not a story. I'll write it as a story. It's narrative. But it's not made up. It's real. And also, I wanted to do footnotes. You know, I wanted to put in everything I could possibly find out about the truth. So definitely not for children per se, and yet the youngest girl in the salon I found out was 14 years old, like my heroine. Her name was Rozhika, but they called her Little Chicken, which is lovely. Little hen, you know, little hen.
And so when people were contacting you about the Red Ribbon, did you instantly think, I need to write this as a book, or were they just contacting you to kind of let you know? At what point did it transition to, I'm going to record this and share this?
That's a good question. I think when people are involved with their personal histories, particularly traumatic histories, and this could be people writing about the Holocaust or people who've survived. You know, there are going to be so many stories now coming out of Gaza to balance that, and coming out of Ukraine, coming out of wherever in the world. And I think families and survivors want their stories to be told. And so I think in many ways people contact you to say, this was my relative's life. This is the life that I have come from. These are the stories that I've inherited in my DNA and in my family history. And they pass it to you. And it was almost like gathering it all and saying, yes, and now I can pass it on to even more people. And oh my goodness, yeah, a lot of people have read this history now.
Yeah, and was it with the same agent then? So although you'd done YA, suddenly you'd done adult non-fiction. Were they happy with that?
Well, again, it was another one of those conversations. So I went to see my agent, who's London-based, and it was always very exciting to go down to London. And oh, it's so expensive and noisy, you know, and no, I loved it. And I sat with her and she said, well, what do you have planned next after, you know, the Red Ribbon and Summerland? I said, well, so I'm thinking of writing because I'd already started writing non-fiction. I was already writing. I said, I want to write the story of this fashion salon. I think I can find out a lot more now. And she just went,
okay, she knew that it was a good idea. Yeah.
And I was just like, oh yeah, maybe somebody will read it. And I had that really fairy tale that very few writers are lucky to have, and I wish it for everyone. I wish it, you know, for all of us, of having this book idea fought over. And ironically, the extraordinary, you know, this worldwide phenomenon of people saying we have to publish this and going to auction, it all happened while I was in America to go and interview the last surviving dressmaker.
Yeah, so you were doing the deal while still interviewing.
I was travelling. I was literally being driven across the Golden Gate Bridge to go and interview Bracha Kohut. Bracha was 21 when she went to Auschwitz and ended up sewing in this fashion salon. And I was going to meet her in person for the first time. And my agent's calling up saying, Lucy, you have to hear this. And for the whole week that I was staying with Bracha's family, I was on the phone and on the internet, and I was interviewing. And it was the most extraordinary week of my life. Not in a, oh, everybody loves me. It wasn't it. That wasn't it. It was more like, we can do this. I can actually, this is what I'm meant to be doing. This is my responsibility. Plus, I got a couple of days in the archives in San Francisco, which ironically, serendipitously, if that's the word, were the one place where testimonies of some of the dressmakers were gathered. I mean, how is that for coincidence? Well, it's not when you look into it, but yes. So, yeah, I felt very, very, very lucky. And then I was looking for someone to travel to Israel to interview other family members. And I said, Angela, we know each other through working in museums and writing. Do you want to come to Tel Aviv, have some beach time?
In the rain.
In the rain. And I was really glad to share that experience with you.
Yeah. No, and I think that kind of brings us full circle. So that's how we met at the bit. So we met through your history wardrobe presentations. Yeah. We did one together.
We did.
Years ago. We did time travel.
Because we had a TARDIS and we needed to use it.
Yeah, we had a fake TARDIS, which was fabulous. So anyway, that's a whole
What do you mean fake
story.
TARDIS?
Oh, it was the real one, sorry. So then we worked through work, and then and we just got talking about books and
a lot of shared interests.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously I met you before she was too famous. So
before it was unbearable.
I think this was just coming out or had just come out. So yeah,
because it was just before your first book came out, The Moss House, so which is also gorgeous.
Oh, thanks. And then to see this journey, and to see you on this journey as well. I remember you sort of saying, "Oh, I've been contacted by these people," and I think that's you write fiction, and then to have somebody say, "Oh, actually, that's quite."
And to switch from children writing for young adult, and then to write for adults.
Yeah,
I love writing for adults now.
Yeah, so talk about obviously writing young adults, and you said you kind of got into that. So the ideas that you had, you instantly thought of them as young adults, and your protagonists were young.
Or perhaps the market did. Perhaps that's the world of publishing puts people into slots.
Yeah, and then you've kind of broken out of that now.
Yeah,
with your non-fiction. So can you tell us what you've been doing since Dressmakers? What's your...
How long have you got?
Okay, well, we've got 25 minutes. So.
Oh, brilliant. I think it's really interesting for anybody who's creative, who knows that we always have a lot of ideas. Yes. There are always directions that we could go in, and I've been writing a lot of non-fiction costume history books, which I love doing, and so on. And fiction always got shoved out of the way. I thought, no, I've done that. I really enjoyed it, but it was always almost like a luxury thing. So following the very great success of the dressmakers of Auschwitz, and a lot of promotional work I had not anticipated.
Yeah, we might come back
just
to
how
that
fascinating and how exhausting and how brilliant all of that is. But I was always looking for more stories, and during this research, I picked up on some strands, linking in with textile history, and for a while I didn't want to touch, another non-fiction book. I was so saturated and so overwhelmed by the response to it, and still a lot of emotions around it as well. It's an incredibly powerful subject to engage with. But then I came across mention of a red jumper, a red sweater in a museum collection, and you've worked in museums. Objects tell stories, right?
Yes.
You're looking at Emily Bronte's hair, and it's funny what's left of us when we're gone. That was very much that theme. I work a lot with those fragments that survive and trying to hold them and share them again, and so things aren't lost. I mean, Emily Bronte's hair, it could just have been chucked in the bin, or it could have been, had no label on it. You wouldn't know whose hair it was. So I thought, whose jumper was this? And it had a name, and it had a city. And the name was Jochebed Heidenstein, and the city was Berlin. And you know how something sticks? I thought, I've got to find out, who is this girl? Who is Jochebed? Where was she in Berlin? And I know we didn't get a chance to go to Berlin together. You had other exciting things going on, but I did take a couple of friends to Berlin, had a couple of research trips there, and I basically found out the very beautiful, very, very sad story of this sweater. And I found other stories that linked, and I've written another non-fiction book called 4 Red Sweaters. I had to call them sweaters, not jumpers, because the American publisher, they don't use the word jumper. So that's coming out in March. It'll be a whole different
4 jumpers.
I mean, sweater is four woolly pulleys. I wanted to call it unravelled.
Oh, that sounds good.
It does, but 4 red sweaters.
4 red sweaters.
And it links in with my love of textile history, and I've collected a lot of knitwear and woolly-related things associated with the 4 girls. Again, all true stories. All true stories. And so I finished writing that, which was... that was hard work.
Yeah, that's just been recent, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it didn't need a lot of editing. Thank you, editors. I'm very much a person who prepares so much beforehand that I don't I mean, you're similar, aren't you? You've got it all up here,
all up here,
and you write, and then it needs tweaks. It needs tweaks, but. And then, magically, almost the day after I'd submitted 4 red sweaters to my agent, that idea that I kept shoving away for fiction, it came back. And for 3 days, I just wrote fiction, and then life intervened. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm writing fiction, but I'm writing it for adults.
Yeah. So is that different in any way, or is it just the story is for adults, or have you decided that that's your audience? Like, what comes first? Is it the story and just happens to be for adults, or do you think you select, oh, this is the audience that I'm writing for?
I don't know if I could write for young adults again now. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all a skill, aren't they? Whichever genre, whichever age you're writing for. You know, even writing for toddlers, this is a huge skill. People underestimate the skill of telling the story to the right audience. But I love getting properly stuck into all of the issues, the ramifications of things, and I think I wanted to swear in books.
You wanted a bit more freedom.
And I think that I wanted the freedom, but I also, having written about teenagers and children, which is incredibly valuable, I'd gotten to the point in my life where I thought, I want to write about being middle-aged. I want to write about the fabulous awfulness of luckily reaching my fifth decade. I'm in my 50s, and I wanted to engage with some of the things that little Lucy, the little girl that we still carry inside us. What's it like now being in this this body and in this world? So it is very, very, very adult. Okay. A lot of fun. Yeah. And it's historical fiction still.
Excellent. So you're staying within that sort of.
I can't help it.
Can you tell us any more about it, or is it wait? Or should we wait? Should we get you back? We'll get you back next year.
Do you want to tell you more about it? Just think, Char ladies versus Nazis.
Char lady versus Nazis. That's enough. We know now. That's
spoiler alert. Menopausal women win. That's cool. It was really hard thinking of the elevator pitch. I was trying to think, what stories are there where middle-aged women take on the world and win? And surprisingly few. We need more.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a big gap for that, isn't there? I think we've got sort of
Well, there are fabulous authors who are writing about these things, but always I come back to what do I have to say, and who are these people that I've met in my head? And, oh my God, what are they planning? Really? And I love that process of exploring a book. The similar with The Red Ribbon. You know, who are these characters? What are their interactions? Where are we going?
Yeah. So now you're on this voyage of adult fiction. Do you think that's where have you already got other ideas that you're writing down, or are you quite focused in on this one at the moment?
There's always ideas, aren't there? Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm neurodivergent, autistic, and ADHD, so I like the plodding stuff, but my brain is skittering off to a million universes, and I think there's part of me that I'd like to write fantasy fiction. Cool. Yeah, which I have done via YA, I think, the clocks tick, don't they? And you cannot do everything in one day.
Unfortunately not, no, but keep going. And so I think, again, a lot of the books, especially, we'll talk briefly about your non-fiction as well. So you've got 6 non-fiction books. So costume history, kind of focus on those. So can you tell us a little bit about those? Or
I think that's interesting from the point of view of, I think whenever you have a book festival and a writers' festival, whether it's, now we're looking at themes of childhood and children's writing, but there's a lot of that idea, people in the audience might be aspiring writers, or they might be, further on that journey, of what you can do and what you're allowed to do. And so I talked a little bit about being pigeonholed as YA. When I sent my first manuscript off, The Diary of Pelly D, I didn't know it was YA, I just wrote it. I just thought it was a great story. And so I think it's really exciting. I've forgotten where I was going with this. Where was I going with this?
I was just asking about your non-fiction, so it's kind of getting...
So I got to the point where I was already known for writing children's fiction. I was doing lots of work in schools, speaking to children, audiences, and loving that. But I realised that there was a period in history that nobody had written about from a clothes history point of view. It was the First World War, and we were coming up to the centenary of the Great War. It was 2012, 2013 coming up, and I was preparing to do a costume talk on it, and I thought, there is no book just on First World War fashion. The compendium sort of skipped over it and said, and there was this. you know, and the women threw away their corsets. And I actually said to someone, I said, you know, I'm going to do a talk on women in the Great War, and I'm going to write a book about it as well. And she said, well, there weren't any women in the Great War.
A book is definitely needed.
Where did they go? And of course now, since the centenary, but then you think this is staggering. This is the 21st century. And so I'm really happy, whatever books I'm doing, to make them female-centred. And, you know, you're similar in your approach to history, to tell the story of whichever group has been marginalised or suppressed in that way. And so I just thought overnight, I thought somebody should write this book. I wonder who could do it. And I just had that feeling, oh my God, I could do that. And I suppose if people don't write, or if they see a published author, they might think, oh, well, it's easy for them, they just know to do it and they're super confident. But there is still that feeling, could I do that? You know, you sort of batten down the imposter syndrome. And I did, and it's a gorgeous book, beautifully illustrated. I did a follow-on one linking with women in the Second World War around the world and so on. So
yeah, I think that comes back almost to the Red Ribbon. You're kind of at the right person at the right time. Things seem to come together. And when we heard from an agent yesterday, and she was saying how books can be amazing, but if the world's not quite ready for it, it's kind of the stars then come into alignment, and then that's when it goes out into the world.
And sometimes we don't get it right. I had an idea to write about the Russian night witches, the bomber crews of World War II. They were women and girls who were flying these rickety biplanes and literally dropping bombs on the Germans, and they were known as the Nachthexen by the German, the Night Witches. And I thought, oh, this is a great book. And I pitched it to my publishers, and they said, well, I mean, this is way back before. This is when Russia was invading Crimea and, you know, all the other places. And they said, we can't, you know, we can't sell this. We can't sell a pro-Russian book. So I wrote it as a fantasy. I think it's great. I think it's, tell you what, it has beautiful artwork, but as a book in the commercial world, you know, it wasn't a success. The people who read it and understood it, who got it, and I absolutely understand. And I think there are going to be elements now of writing Holocaust history. Inevitably, you know, there are so many tensions now in the real world of politics and war and genocide. So there's a lot to juggle still. Yeah.
Well, I've just got two more quicker questions, and then I think we'll open it out if there is anything else. So I've got, what advice would you give to others? Obviously, you've written lots of different things, but you're still on that journey. You've got a new adult novel coming out. You've got four red sweaters. But what advice would you give to somebody who hasn't yet published or is looking to?
I think you've touched on it, and other authors I speak to a lot. That whole idea of write what you want to write what you... I think having integrity, it comes back to that, authenticity. And I've done that with The Dressmakers of Auschwitz, with The Red Ribbon. You know, whatever flaws books may have, however well it's received by readers or not, if you write it as well as you can, with all of your, I want to say morals, but you know, that's a bit of a misused word, but all of your integrity, your heart in the right place. And then, of course, the age-old advice is read and write, and just keep writing and persevere. I don't think publishing is an easy world, but it's wonderful to be part of it. And to think, I think about little Lucy writing her little notebooks, and I just think, you know, she had a tough time, and she, you know, life can still be really hard. But if you can just say to your little child sort of thing, you know, you did this, you wrote these books, and hopefully many more wonderful projects to follow. So yes, do what you do with integrity, with authenticity, and love it.
Yeah, keep enjoying it.
I mean, there are practical things like, yes, get an agent, and I wish everybody could get an agent as fabulous as mine has been. She terrifies me, but she's so good.
She's been through this whole journey with you
since 2003.
Yeah, and is that a great, I guess that's probably the best way to be then, to somebody that knows you and your work, but also knows that you want to diverse as well.
She's pretty tolerant, and I did write to her recently. I was due to be writing I had an idea for a biography about a woman who escaped from Vienna, a very famous I can't tell everybody because it's being recorded and I might still write it. But I wanted to write this biography, and I wrote to her recently, my agent. I said, Kate, I'm going to postpone the biography because I've got this idea for a fiction story. And she was very good coming back saying, well, okay, I'm behind this. And you know, she's thinking, how am I going to place this? But I just said, you know, I've got to the time in life where, you know, we don't know how long we've got. I want to write this book that means something to me.
Yeah, and then the flip of that is obviously there's all the process behind the scenes of research, writing, being brave enough to share. But then you said about the promotion of dressmakers, and just tell us a bit about that and how much is involved in that side of things.
I love it. I love, I've spoken to so many audiences, and COVID lockdowns and so on, obviously they impacted how many of these could be in person at first, and so virtual audiences. It's been amazing to be able to reach people, to be able to reach readers, and people have then reached back. Family members now write to me saying, well, here's my story. Did you hear of this woman when you were researching? And we actually had an extraordinary moment while we're promoting the book. One of the women, one of the friends of Marta, who ran the fashion salon, her friend Ella, was part of an escape attempt. And I write in the book, just almost as a footnote, what happens to Ella. By coincidence, the name of my heroine and my grandmother. And a reader got back in touch and said, well, this is our family member. This is my husband's aunt, and we never knew what happened to her.
Wow.
And I said, well, I've never seen what she looks like. And they sent photographs, and I sent the information. And to me, that is extraordinary. And finding out more information since the book's been written about the women mentioned in it. So I think that is beautiful. But I have done some promotion. I have done book talks in Spanish. Really bad.
Yeah, you did one in French.
I got invited to a chateau near Paris. Would you come and do the talk? They said, we can have an interpreter. And I thought, well, it's not the same, is it? I thought, darn it, I'm going to brush off my A-level French. And I had an edition of the book in French. It's been translated into 22 languages. So yeah, I had a crash course in French, and I did that talk in French. Whether anybody understood my French, that was a challenge.
Yeah, so I was like, how's it going? Well, I'm just learning my talk in French at the moment. So I was like, I wonder what the questions are going to be at the end of it.
I mean, I can't travel in France. I wouldn't know how to order a beer, but I can tell you about the process of dehumanization through clothing in the SS extermination.
It's not even an easy subject, is it?
No, I laugh a lot. I use humour a lot to keep separate, and I think that's something I've tried with talks, whether talking about the Red Ribbon, which is a challenging subject for children. To, what is this place that these young girls find themselves in, and then to talk about the very adult themes of the dressmakers of Auschwitz. And I think there are times to pause, and there are times to let it sink in. And when you read the book, there are times a lot of people are very emotionally affected, and I think we should be. And there are times doing talks when I feel anger coming up, and a lot of I do feel very tearful. But I also want to emphasise the life of it. So during the promotion, although I've done so many lovely interviews, and yours is the best, obviously, with a wonderful bijou audience, that emphasising the humanity and the friendship and the love of these women, that they had to support each other, is one of the loveliest things. So
I think that's what comes through, and I think with all stories it's having that bit of that hope, that friendship, that love that goes through, and just whatever the ending is, it's having,
because it's not just the ending, is it? Because the 4 Red Sweaters, the one that I've just finished, it is the saddest story that I've written. Not the saddest story ever, there are multitudes of stories around the world, but I thought it's still about love, even though can be tragic in places. The love itself is so powerful. It's a very mother and daughter love, which is not always something we see. We see a lot of complex relationships with mothers, particularly in YA fiction, because we're all, going head to head with our carers and our parents and things. So it was lovely to reflect on the power of love there. Yeah.
Great. Well, have we got any questions in the room at all?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, did your love of history, did that start in childhood? No. So when did it start, and what actually first sparked that love of history?
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's whether you get a good teacher. And so I did get a couple of good teachers at school, just periodically, but then history, when I was at school back in ye olde days of O-level, history was very much about blokes. It was men, and it was elite men, and it was names and dates. And even now, I'm just not interested. I want to know what would it have been like for me. How would I have managed? I mean, terribly, I'm sure. And so it was actually as an undergraduate, I was studying English literature, but I spent all my time reading Holocaust history and Holocaust memoirs, because although I was supposed to be studying Greek tragedy and learning about, Agamemnon and Medea and all of these extraordinary hyperbolic figures, to me, tragedy was, the quiet trauma of childhood, or some little thing that you read in the news and don't think twice, but somebody's world's collapsed in it. So I was trying to approach that, and then I just got addicted. And it was because I realised that history didn't have to be separate. It didn't have to be somebody else. It's us, and it's little details. The scrap of Emily Bronte's hair, or Charlotte Bronte's wedding bonnet, or I always say sweat stains on antique garments. And I just think, actually, get that. And so now I just can't get enough of it, and I read more non-fiction than fiction, which is staggering. And as a kid, I just thought, boring. I wanted stories and adventures and Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Any other question?
So you've written so many different types of book, and you've spoken about the different commercial success that they've had. But is there a book or a particular type of book that you find the most personally satisfying to write?
You mean of
your book? Yes. Which has brought you the most personal satisfaction? I
cherish all of them, actually, flaws and all. And every once in a while, when I'm having a clear out of my bookshelf, don't know if you do, you're cool, don't you, sometimes? I just think, no, I'm going to get avalanched under books. And I'll maybe sometimes sit down and pick up, I did a sequel to my first book called Cherry Heaven, and I pick it up, and I read it, and I get engrossed, or I pick up Night Witches, or whatever. And I think what struck me, particularly with the immense wisdom of maturity. I understand what I was doing in those books now. And so a couple of them in particular, I realised, wow, little Lucy was trying to express something that, I keep saying little Lucy, she was, 5'6" by then, but there are some that I go back to and think, oh, bless you, you were really trying to use fiction in that way to express what it was like to be a young person. And I suppose a lot of writing for children can be, the stuff that's written by adults for children, a lot of it is saying, do I want to create an enchanted world for children where I can be safe and enjoy things, Enid Blyton's magic faraway tree, but still has its dangers, or do I want to express myself? So I think of all the books I've written, fiction, I think The Red Ribbon is, to paraphrase another writer we were speaking to earlier, that book is my heart. But the book I'm proudest of overall is The Dressmakers of Auschwitz, and I think as a legacy, if you can use that word, I'm so glad I've done that to pass on to other generations who will then go off and do their own brilliant stories and research and so on.
And have you had researchers, so since Dressmakers, have you had other people now looking into
Yeah, there are people studying it at university.
Yeah. And brilliant. Yeah.
And that's why you've just got to do your best. And I know that there will be new knowledge and things perceived differently. Inevitably, there will be some flaws in it. Presumably, you do the best you can. But it was definitely done so that other people can. And I just think so many people say, well, I didn't know about this. I said, well, you couldn't, because nobody had written about it.
Like women, First World War fashion, there wasn't anything there.
So I'm really glad to have had that opportunity. And of course, all of it was building on the work of other writers and building on the real lived experiences. And I say lived experiences, so many people died, unable to give their testimonies. So this book didn't just come out of me, it came out of all of these things. But yes, there are students and educators getting in touch now. And that's when you get that, oh gosh, I am actually grown. I am officially now an expert. And I think that's also been very useful to own, not have that imposter syndrome, and just think, did the right thing there, and we can always keep going and do better.
Yeah, great. Any other questions at all? Yes?
Have you thought about going to, TV companies or sort of Netflix with those two books? Because although I'm not totally Jewish, I have Jewish ancestry, and for me, I really feel that there's a danger in the future that a lot of this history is just going to vanish, and I think it's really important to keep it. You know, it might not be the main history that's taught in school, but I think it's really important for it to stay alive. Have you never considered like approaching somebody to see if they would dramatise it? I know obviously it's your book, it can be a bit precious with things like this, but if that was my work, I think I would want to get it out there to, you know, make sure it stayed alive in some way.
It's a really important point, isn't it, about, I mean, it isn't just Jewish history, but we know, I mean, while we're on the subject of the Holocaust, there is a lot of distortion and denialism around it. And I think that's definitely an element now that there are so few survivors left alive. You know, I spoke to the last surviving dressmaker, and sadly she's now died. And so there is that idea that, yeah, it is a responsibility. So yes, books are great, but people access stories and histories in so many different ways, don't we now? So the Red Ribbon was optioned for a film with Will Smith's production company. So I was thinking, oh, that's going to be all right at the premiere. Unfortunately, COVID intervened and various Hollywood problems intervened. But I'm very happy to say that there is very strong interest for the... It's more like people approach you about it, if you know what I mean. And so I am... let's just say I've Googled how to write a film script. Well, I don't know, I haven't written one before, but hey, you know. But no, I think that idea of telling the story for new generations, telling the histories.
Somebody who springs to my mind who, well, I think should be fabulous to do it for you, is Sally Wainwright.
Ah, but she's got her own. She's, you know, she's a brilliant writer, isn't she? She is fab, but she's telling the stories that are clamouring to her to be told. There's a lot of talent, and all I can say is I can't talk about it yet, pre-contract, but just keep your fingers crossed for it. I think you're onto something. You've got the right idea, for sure.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Any quick last question we've got? Yeah, of course.
Question. I'm not sure how well articulated though. Well, I think you've written non-fiction and you've written fiction, and you write your own like costume history books and things like this. How does the research period for you differ with your historical fiction, for instance? Do you do well? Obviously, you do like archive research and things. Does it differ between your like history books and your non-fiction history books, and then do you engage with it in a different way? Does it inspire you in different ways when you're engaging with the objects?
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Like, because I think for me, I do a lot of archive research and stuff because I'm doing a history degree and I engage in it like academically, but I find it really interesting how it inspires you to write non-fictional books as well. And how does it engage with you in different ways depending on what you're writing?
I love that question. Yeah, I do. I do, although I hadn't thought about it before. So do we engage with research differently depending on whether we're accessing it for academic reasons or non-fiction or publication reasons or fiction? The answer is I love the research. And so I think I was approaching historical fiction as a way of, I can research this forever with my autistic brain and get absolutely stuck into this, and a story will come from it. And so whatever I'm involved in, my brain is working on it. So whether that's non-fiction comes out or fiction, but I'm not sure that it's any different. So because I've been researching to write for Red Sweaters, this has had certain elements of World War II history in my mind, and then I met some characters who started living in their own fiction world. So I think that the crossover for me is there, and all of my fiction, it absolutely has drawn from research. It's, you know, from archive. You know, we love our archives, don't we? But I must say that I can't believe I'm writing historical fiction again, because I felt after Red Ribbon, I thought, what a responsibility it is. And, you know, and absolutely I agree with historical fiction, even Holocaust fiction. It's necessary to bring new readers in and to share our responses to tragedy and trauma. but I love writing the actual history as well. But then I get to do it all. I get to go on stage and present in a very vibrant way. So I think whatever we're into, just get stuck into it and absolutely indulge and then see what comes of it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, we're going to have to finish up there. So thank you very much for joining us, filling in for Lucy Parry, but giving us a fascinating talk and sharing your whole career and all the new exciting things coming as well.
Yep.
So much more to do.
Yeah,
So,
going to need a cup of tea now. Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.